I work at the Darabont County Archives, Part 6G, Hunt Section. Written by JenniKinoShimatta. Here's the rest of our experiences at the Petersham copper mine. Sorry for the huge info dump. After we stretched, peed, smoked, and/or drank, we ate lunch. There wasn't much that Alex could tell us about the mine since she'd never actually been on the other side of the fence. She said that 2 guys got through the fence when she was in high school, but that they were caught and arrested before they could do anything more than sneak across the entrance. Doc Copper was always on the lookout. The trip was an aberration compared to our other points of interest since there was no guarantee that we'd be able to get inside. Yeah, we had technically trespassed in the Morgan Hollows train yard, but that was a fairly victimless crime. Someone actually lived here and kept a shrewd eye out for kids looking to explore the site where the acid man struck. Also, unlike the other locations, the copper mine didn't have any history of paranormal activity. Granted, that was more likely than not due to Doc Copper's hold on the land. But for all intents and purposes, it was just a murder site. I'm not sure what we were hoping to find, but what we got was completely unexpected. We had finished lunch and had gathered around the entry gate. The place was huge, as expected, but also decrepit with tall grass growing from the piles of rock and silt in the open yard. The burn marks from Herc's trap at the front remained black against the fine sand past the gate. Steve, Alex, and I were leaning against the gate while the others talked or smoked or drank. "Weird place, huh?" Ken said as he strolled up and lit a cigar from the silver load, one of several boxes that he had bought before we left. "Not much to speak of, right? What are we even doing here?" "You're trespassing. That's what you're doing." A voice sounded from behind us and we reflexively spun around. Declan Copper was in his 60s, short at about 5'5" and dressed in brown work pants and a worn red plaid hunting shirt. Balding, and what little hair he had left was gray and wispy around his temples. His wide mouth, set into sallow, limp cheeks, was pulled into a disapproving frown. The barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun, chambers open but loaded, was casually slung across his shoulder. "Hey man," Jimmy called as he ran up. "We don't want any trouble." "Well then, man, if you weren't looking for any trouble, what are you bunch of miscreants doing here?" Copper said in a no-nonsense tone. He folded his arms around the barrels of the shotgun and looked at Jimmy from under his bushy gray eyebrows. "This here is private property." Alex placatingly put her hands up and took a step back from the gate. "Sorry, Mr. Copper. We were just curious and—" "I recognize you, girlie, from what, 2 or 3 years ago? I wouldn't forget your haircut. All shaved up like a Hare Krishna. Thought you could jump over the gate with your little friends and dig around. I'd have thought that Lagerton would have put some of the fear of God into you." Alex had the good graces to look more than a little ashamed. "We're sorry, Mr. Copper. We just wanted to stop here and look around. It was never our intention to trespass or to try to trespass," I said. He glanced at me shrewdly. Then his eyes turned to Ken and Steve, Jimmy and Alex, and then back my way. Ken was still puffing on his cigar calmly. "Those 2, he said as he pointed to Jimmy and Alex. "I've seen them around. Typical teenagers looking to break in and see the sights. Maybe find out if there's still blood on the floor. You," he pointed to me with a blunted finger. "I don't know why you'd be interested in this." I tried not to take offense at the comment or at the intimation that I wouldn't be interested in the side of a mass murder. Instead, I plastered on my biggest smile and pulled Ken closer to the gate. We're a paranormal investigation group from Castleton University. This here's Ken, our president. We're just looking around the county and going to some of the places with a history. Ken stepped up and took the cigar out of his mouth before jutting his hand between the bars of the gate. Ken Barg, Mr. Copper. Nice to meet you. Copper gave us all a raised eyebrow but grudgingly shook Ken's hand. Like my friend said, we weren't planning on trespassing, Mr. Copper. We just wanted to take a look around the area. Alex here told us stories of what happened here, and since we were in the area, we decided to stop by. We're sorry for any inconvenience. Oh, she told you stories, eh? Copper said as he stared at Alex, who wisely turned away. There's no end to people coming up here looking to see what's what. I'll tell you the same thing I tell everybody. The events of the attack are a matter of public record. I have nothing to add. He eyed the cigar dangling from Ken's fingers. The action wasn't lost on Ken. Now, Ken, like I said before, was a consummate schmoozer. And he knew how to direct conversations. He'd argued successfully with Castleton to establish CPIT. He seemed very comfortable speaking with Race Rock at Bleak Hill. And who knows what kind of yarns he had to spend to rent the hole. Ken spun the still-burning cigar between his fingers. It was impossible to miss the way Copper's eyes greedily followed the glowing ember. Well then, we're sorry to have caused you disturbance, and we'll be on our way shortly. Ken motioned to the rest. Alex, Steve, Jimmy, and I were still beside him at the gate, while the rest were sitting in the open doors of the vans. Alice and Downey were taking swigs from a bottle of Jack, while Jamie, Meg, Terry, and Cecily fiddled with the equipment. Kitty was lying on top of one of the vans, smoking. Let's pack up, everyone. We'll stop back in Petersham for dinner, Ken called to them. Hold up there, friend. That, wouldn't happen to be a Monte Cristo #2, would it? You wouldn't have another one of those with you, Copper said, pointing to the cigar between Ken's fingers. Ken's back was turned to Copper so the old man didn't see the smirk spread across his face. I haven't made a trip into town, see, and my stores have been running a little low, Copper continued. I didn't actually look at the wrapper when I got them, Ken said. I suppose it could be. Hey, Jamie, would you grab that box of cigars from my bag? Jamie disappeared into a van and then jogged over with a long cardboard humidor. Well, would you look at that, Monte Cristo Petite #2. You know your cigars, Mr. Copper. Ken flipped open the box, ostensibly to look at the wrappers, but really just to show that there were still 23 left. He slipped the box between the bars of the gate, but as Copper reached for it, he pulled it back. Still, they did cost a pretty penny. Copper licked his lips, eyes darting back and forth, before seemingly making a decision and dashing to the right of the gate. Abruptly, the gate split open and Copper reappeared. He hastily grabbed the cigars, tucking them firmly under his armpit. Come down to the flophouse and I'll pay you for them. I don't normally carry my wallet when youngsters come round the gate. He snapped the shotgun closed and shouldered it again. Don't worry about this, just birdshot. Oh, that's not necessary, Mr. Copper. Take them as a gift. Ken was laying it on pretty thick. Copper stared at Ken for a hot minute. I thought for sure that he was going to call him on his BS. Nonsense. Copper laughed and clapped Ken on the back. I'll give you a fair price for 'em. Cubans aren't nothing to give away. Come on then, all of you. I'm gonna close the gate behind us." "Sure, seems like a great idea. Follow the crotchety old man with a shotgun into a locked murder camp. You know, just a regular day in the life of a paranormal enthusiast." While Ken and I packed up the cameras, he wasn't going to risk them getting stolen while we were inside. He flashed the inside of his rucksack to show 3 more boxes of cigars. Good thing he didn't ask me how many I had, right? We chuckled before locking the van and following Copper into the camp. Directly to the left of the chalky dust clearing of the main entrance gate sat the sagging concrete hole into the mine. Tracks, rusted from age and disuse, ran from the opening behind towering piles of gravel and silt and sand to the main processing building. Weeds, grass, and hardy saplings dotted the cracked asphalt and dirty lanes to the mine. The rusty skeletons of massive excavators peered over the sagging roof of a massive warehouse directly in front of the mine. But we weren't heading in that direction. Copper was leading us to the right, towards a cluster of prefab buildings that used to be the mine's business office and the flophouse. My daddy bought the land from some tribal commune back in the 30s. Didn't get a chance to do much with it until after World War II. Only to find out that the land didn't even belong to the commune. He had some bad run-ins with the locals when the mine first opened in '47. Some nonsense about a god shrine or some such rubbish. But he fought hard and eventually it all stopped. I took over in '82. Time was when we were shipping out 10 tons of the stuff per day. And that was before we found the main scene, mind you. The place was hopping then. Sad to see it brought down to ruin. Sold most of the equipment after the affair. Just some old junkers left. Take more to haul them away than they're worth. The old man chuckled to himself as we approached a long 3-story building. Come inside and find a seat. The flophouse smelled of old beer and stale smoke. Not necessarily a bad smell, but one that spoke of a long history. The mudroom beyond the door still had rows of old sooty boots lined up against the wall. We set our bags down there and went into the main area. There was an empty bar on the right side of the worn stool, bolted to the equally worn linoleum floor. In the middle of the room were 2 pool tables covered in vinyl drop cloths, and all around an assortment of comfortable-looking chairs and couches. A brand new 4K TV hung on the far wall, with smaller speakers surrounding it with a bunch of wires running behind the TV. Jimmy, Alex, Kitty, Cecily, Steve, and Jamie sat in an enormous leather sectional beside the bar, while Ken, Alice, Downey, and I sat at the bar. Meg and Terry took a love seat beside the sectional under a window. Copper disappeared up a flight of stairs from the mudroom, but we could hear him banging about and cursing upstairs. "He's on the level, right?" Jamie whispered to Steve. He shrugged and nodded at Alex. "He's never done anything to anyone as far as I know," Alex replied. "He usually just calls the cops. I've never heard of him opening the gate before." "This place feels funny," Meg said. Because, of course, she did. Terry nodded along with her. "It's making my stomach turn. It feels like my head is filled with sloshing hot water." Terry did look a bit peaky, but they were probably just psyching themselves out again. "I feel sick." "Maybe it's the Taco Bell," Jimmy helpfully opined. We didn't need to do anything. Alex elbowed him sharply for all of us. "Sorry for the wait, I had to find my wallet." Copper strode through the room with a spring in his step and the box of Monte Cristos in hand. He stopped beside Ken and thrust out 2 crisp $100 bills that Ken gratefully accepted before slapping the box on the bar. "Now, who wants a cigar?" Ken, Steve, Alex, and Downey took him up on the offer. I don't smoke cigars, but I did bum a cigarette off of Jamie. "Well then, I'd offer you a drink, but as you can see..." Copper swept his arm across the empty shelves behind the bar. "Not much to offer." "I might be able to help you with that." Ken smirked and got his rucksack before setting a stiff cardboard box on the bar. Copper's livery-lipped mouth fell open, and his roomy eyes went so wide that I thought that they'd shoot out and bounce off the wall like rubber balls. "Oh my God, that's a bottle of Macallan 18. But that's almost 4 bills. "It is indeed, and it certainly was," Ken crowed before pulling the crystal-clear bottle filled with amber. "I figured that this called for a celebration." Copper hooted and pulled a handful of rocks glasses out from behind the bar. Soon we all had a pleasant buzz on, and the crotchety old man was running smooth. "There's no big secret here, never was. I can't understand why every pipsqueak in Petersham wants to jump the fence and break their fool necks in a broken mine." Copper puffed luxuriously on his stogie and took a sip of scotch. His accent got thicker the more he drank. "Now you guys are the first I've ever let in. And let me tell you, perfect gentlemen, the lot of you, except the ladies, of course." "So, why do you think Herc did it?" I asked. He slumped forward thoughtfully. Frankly, I was surprised that he was willing to consider answering the question at all. "I've worked in mines my whole life, and I've seen miners go on rampages before. Nothing like Herc did, of course, but rampages and murders and setting themselves on fire. A mine is a dark place, but not just literally, but also figuratively, if you're getting my drift. Long hours, hard labor, all in the cold, all in the dark. Just rock and steel and the stink of your fellow miners all day. Then you get topside and you're stuck with the same people. Bad food, bad pay, bad liquor. Usually bad foremen and bad bosses as well." He swallowed 2 fingers of the scotch left in his glass at once, then poured another 3. "A mine is like a crucible. It hardens and tempers, yeah, in the end, but before that it softens. And it's the softening to watch for. I've seen hundreds just like him, stupid, strong, eager to get drunk and fuck, if you ladies will pardon my language. And sometimes, just sometimes, they get a little soft inside the mine. Exhausted, dirty, more than a little hungover, more often than not. That's when they lose it. I'm not saying that there's some demon in the mine." He puffed his cigar nervously, "or that some fantastical creature. But when miners go soft, they start hearing things. And what the voices say is really what they want to hear. So, in answer to your question, I think that Herc really wanted to hurt some people, probably fighting the urge all his life, and eventually the crucible found his weakness, and it destroyed him. It's like whittling. You want whatever it is to be detailed, sure. But if y'all get bogged down in the details and cut too deep, then the whole thing's ruined. So, you think he did work alone? I asked. He looked nervous again. Sweat was beading from his brow. Did he ever show signs of being good with chemicals? I asked. All miners, especially those that work deep, must know about chemicals, gases, rocks, a whole host of very specific facts that, to a layman, may appear extraordinary, but to an actual miner seem stupidly simple. He knew about acids. All miners learn it on the job, especially those that work close to the sump. And he'd used dynamite before. Not here, mind you, too volatile and dangerous for Shell Hill, but at other mines that he'd worked. I've seen pools of runoff underground that would strip flesh from bone lickety-split. No science behind it, no name. But when you mine, you know the smell. You get real acquainted with the way it looks in a flashlight. Unless you want to limp out with nothing but a bloody stump. Wasn't rocket science behind any of it. Herc was a stupid man. A hard worker and amazingly strong. But more than a little soft in the head. Could barely sign his name, couldn't read for shit, pardon my French, ladies, and was completely unable to do anything above second-grade addition and subtraction. He wasn't some mad genius. He wasn't some Rain Man with chemicals. He was just a dumb schmuck with a chip on his shoulder. I don't care what the papers say about his letters. He couldn't plan his way into a whore's bed with his pecker wrapped in hundreds. All he was lucky. Okay, but if he was so stupid, how did no one see that he was guilty? The sheriff interviewed him and didn't think that anything was wrong. How could he have kept all of that secret? I asked. I thanked whatever gods were watching over us that Copper was a chatty drunk. I've thought about that myself over the years. Was there something I could have seen but missed? Something that was warning me about everything? Those Indians on the other side of the hill, the snakes in the sump, the cases of pink eye. Poor Bobby Krisk. Never found hide nor hair of him. There was a whole host of other things going wrong at the time. It never should have gone that deep. I should have seen it. He took a heavy gulp from his glass. It was about 4:30 at that point. We discussed lighter things after my pointed questions, and he'd seemed gregarious enough. But there was a suspicious glint in his eye, telling us that we'd probably overstayed our welcome. Ken gave him the rest of the bottle of scotch. There was only about a fourth of it left anyway, and Copper walked us back to the gate, shotgun slung back over his shoulder. We bid our goodbyes, punctuated by Ken shaking Copper's hand again, and the old man hit the switch to close the gate. I knew that I had to ask him before the chance was gone. Mr. Copper, before we go, just one more question. What really happened with Helen Myers? He grimaced around his cigar, and I thought for sure that he wasn't going to answer. But then he sagged and seemed like he'd shrunk 5 inches and aged 20 years. Despite what that one, he said, pointing to Alex, may have told you. I've heard the rumors swimming around in town, and I can say this. It's a bunch of BS. Herc didn't rape that poor woman to death with some object from that Morgan Freeman movie with a knife in his pecker. I took a moment just to be stunned that Doc Copper had seen 7. No, he continued. He impaled her in the cooch with a pickaxe, had her wrist tied up and hanging from the ceiling of the equipment shed, then just swung upwards with his pick. Lifted her clean off the hook. She was alive when Herc chased me out. He'd never had the best aim, at least if you were to believe the stories the bar girls used to tell. I can't say what happened to her after that. It was subtle. The only reason I even noticed it was because I was looking him directly in the face. But Copper glanced towards the mine after he finished speaking. I was glad that he was able to clear the air about the circumstances surrounding the attack on Myers, but now I had even more questions. Ken grabbed me by the shoulder and we hastily said goodbye before Doc Copper disappeared back into the camp. We drove back to Precipice Bay and got to McAdams for dinner and drinks around 8. The week was almost over, and by the same time tomorrow, Jamie, Alice, Downey, Meg, Terry, and Ken would be on their way back to Castleton. We'd had some amazing moments, and I couldn't help but feel depressed. I tried to take my mind off that by thinking about the experience with Doc Copper. There was a lot that he wasn't saying or was avoiding entirely. The biggest issue bouncing inside my head was one of the last things that he'd said when he'd been listing all the clues pointing to Herc's rampage. There were 2 things that he listed that didn't make any sense: snakes in the sump and cases of pink eye among the miners. Now, it seems unlikely that anything beyond bacteria could survive in the toxic runoff of a coal mine sump. So, the fact that he'd said snakes was beyond bizarre. Also, chemical and acid fumes can cause skin irritation and ocular damage, but he specifically said pink eye, which is a bacterial or viral infection that presents as bloodshot eyes and may form a crust. It seems like a very specific way to describe irritated eyes, and moreover, it perfectly matched the descriptions of the explosive miner victims. Ransdauer and the other witnesses had stated that Ronnie Yout's eyes were bloodshot or beyond prior to his demise. Witnesses also expressed the same observation in the case of the other victims, at least those that were in public when they died. Was it coincidence? Maybe I'm just going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. But there are still a lot of unanswered questions about Herc's murderous rampage. People can spout off all the whys they want, but aside from the bizarre letters, Herc never stated why he was killing people. If he'd had grudges with some of the miners, sure, that was motive enough. But the Native Americans on the other side of Shell Hill? How'd he even find them? As far as anyone can tell, they never went within 500 feet of the mining camp. They didn't interact with anyone in town. So, why would Herc have targeted them? Or maybe their disappearances had nothing to do with Herc at all. Maybe they were just tacked into his kill count out of sheer laziness. We ate and drank until 11:30 when Tall Jim sauntered over on his break with a basket of buffalo wings and a Coke. He fielded some questions as he ate, and we told him about our trips to Bleak Hill and the copper mine. Sounds like you had quite an adventure. Can't say that I'm surprised at what you saw at the pit. Things like that, when people who don't even know who they are get displaced. Well, it makes sense that they wouldn't be able to have a sense of self in death. Insanity is catching, make no mistake. Makes sense that it would continue in death. He pushed aside the empty basket of chicken bones and sipped his soda. Not a very comforting thought, is it? No, it really wasn't, I thought. Now, the copper mine is actually interesting to me since those missing people were from my tribe. There was a considerable issue with the assignment. I told you about the one sites and about the origin of the tall men. Well, that had everything to do with it. Anything relating to that range, those mountains, is beyond sacred and profane to the tribes. Trespassing there is tantamount to treason, or an unbelievable risk of reawakening whatever sleeps there. The tribes that took that risk, the possibility that there were priceless cultural ruins present, outweighed the potential issues with disturbing the spirits. When the four disappeared, considerable time was spent trying to locate them, but after months they were considered lost to the mysteries of the mountain. I said that no one knows where the one-site temple was located, only that it was somewhere in the tall men. Given that fact, we never really went looking for the missing tribesmen. We disapproved of the mine in the first place, and the attacks and legal actions we took to stop it were an effort to stop any potential dangers. I was never happier than when the incident occurred and the mining ceased. Tall Jim finished his drink and excused himself. So, our final expedition answered some questions and raised even more. Something that I was growing to understand was common in Darabont County. It was just more things to investigate at a later date. We ate and drank until Ron kicked us out and then drove back to the 4 Points for the night. There was barely a day left until my friends returned to Castleton, and we decided, with all the excitement, that the last day would be spent relaxing in the bay.